right, hey guys, thanks for joining today and be part of our cybersecurity vodcast here at Arraya Solutions. We've got Scott Brion here with Keith Wood and Mike Piekarski. We are going to be talking about some of the major breaches in 2021, the impact that those breaches had on organizations and the cybersecurity decisions that they're making as we go into the new year and prepare for the unknown. What could be coming in 2022 that we're not prepared for. Guys, one of the things we were talking about before we started was how is a major breach classified, right? And how everyone has different context. It really depends on where you are in the breach, how it's impacted you, and then potentially, what your profession is, right? In IT, for instance, or inside of a company. But what definitely holds true, right, is confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all affected during a breach event. And typically, right, a major breach includes some combination of all three. So we looked at the breaches over 2021. We had breaches that revealed secret information, definitely affected the confidentiality. And we had breaches that affected the integrity of information, the integrity of systems, the integrity of the supply chain. We had breaches, obviously, that affected availability. And so when we were talking about that, right, talking about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware event or the JBS meatpacking event, those were major impacts on availability. We weren't focused as much on confidentiality and integrity there, but it was, where's the food coming from and how's the oil getting pumped, or the petroleum getting pumped up to the Northeast. Then, we as you go into the healthcare, so the healthcare breaches, or the Kaseya breach, or the Vicata breach, right, of the surveillance systems, major confidentiality scenarios there, and those obviously hit the list. And so, with that said, I guess I'll throw it to the team, guys. Mike, where do you see, some of the 2022 spending and investments going, and how do you address the customers' concerns coming into this year after they're kind of mopping up and taking stock of what happened in 2021?
It's hard to say with certitude, but I think one of the things we were talking about before we jumped into the session is the changes that are going to be dictated if people want to stay covered by cyber insurance. So that's going to be first if people aren't already there with MFA and kind of some sort of network segmentation, the basic controls, what we consider basic controls that are new to some of our clients. But
let's pause there for a minute. So let me throw that to Keith. So Keith, Mike just brought that up, cyber insurance, right? Like that's the thing to get ready for starting today. If you haven't done your taxes already, get them done. And then the next thing, right, is start getting prepared for your 2022 underwriter review, if that's what you want to call it. What do we see in 21? The extreme changes there in the cyber insurance reviews, and then where do you think the tightening is going to happen in 2022?
So I think the biggest changes in 2021 were a decrease in coverage for the same amount of premium cost, and a higher or an increased list of requirements to have implemented in your environment for protections, a greater amount of due diligence by the providers and underwriters. I think we're going to continue to see that trend, more due diligence, more, a deeper dive into, the questionnaires of what protections you have in place, how mature is your cyber program, and really that dictating the level of coverage that you're going to be able to obtain for your organization. And, best way to head that off is get in touch now, depending on where you are in your annual cycle of renewal. The earlier, the better. Get in touch. What are the current requirements? What are the questionnaires? Can I have them now to self-assess to see where I'm at, so that I have a longer runway to prepare for that renewal cycle and position my organization better. I mean, ultimately, even though the goal is to acquire the best cyber coverage you can at the cheapest premium rate, your whole organization is going to benefit from a cyber perspective in that, these controls are appropriate and purposeful, that they're looking for to provide protections, so they don't need to pay out on claims. But also, I mean, it's a really good direction for your org to go and follow, because they're fundamental basic controls that should be in place to provide a large amount of protection for your environment.
So what about the top, let's say, 5 of those controls that 2 years ago or a year ago you could have just said on your insurance form, yeah, I have these, that are now being more scrutinized?
So backups, encrypted backups, usability of backups, testing the restorability of backups, recoverability of your environment, and then multi-factor authentication across the board, not just for administrative accounts, but for every user account that has access to the system. I think those are your top 2.
Okay. Gotcha. So basically what you're saying is if you don't have multi-factor rolled out to your org, get that started or get it completed, right, depending on where you are in it. And if you aren't validating and testing your backups, and you have a story that addresses the risks of backups to ransomware, then you might not pass your cyber insurance attestation, right? Or review form, rather, not attestation, for 2022.
Yeah, and a side effect of lack of ability to recover from an incident can have a broader effect on not just your cyber insurance, but your E&O insurance for the business itself, for the ability to provide services to your customers, because of our, everyone's heavy reliance on IT systems for business operations. So, there's two factors there that you really need to address for your backup and recoverability environment.
Sorry, Mike, I stopped you there before when you were talking about, you brought up cyber insurance as the start. What else were you going to say there?
I mean, I honestly don't remember, but as Keith was going through his take, we've talked to some people that were frustrated by the changes given by these insurance companies with their new requirements, because we live in an industry driven by some sort of requirements, and now they got this new list. But what better organization or group to come up with what is the highest priority than the people that are stuck paying the bill when breaches happen? I think we can trust, even if you decide not to get insurance for whatever reason, you can trust that list of requirements is there for a reason. It's because they are the ones that have been on the hook. We're talking about these big breaches, the pipeline, Kaseya, SolarWinds, all these big breaches. They get to see all of the smaller ones that still cost hundreds of thousands of dollars that they have to pay out, that never make the news. And they see the common denominators across all of them. And I think that's where, we see the marketing push for zero trust. We hear more and more every day, but we've talked about it before. It's these same principles. And I think it's easy you just have to accept that if you didn't have it as a requirement, you need to make it a requirement for yourself to start segmenting things, caring about identity protection, caring about your backups, and restoring and testing your environment. I mean, I feel like 15 years ago, we had this same conversation about you're backing up, great, but can you restore? And then the added piece here, now that we have ransomware and things going after the integrity and availability, to use Scott's previous thing of our backups, is if it takes you 2 weeks to restore, then that's not a backup. And if your backups are on the same systems that are in the same broadcast domain or on the same equipment that would be susceptible to ransomware, then you're not protected at all from the threats that are of concern to you. So it's these things are coming down for a reason, and it's time to listen to them.
Yeah. So to that point, right? I mean, right when an incident, when you're part of an incident, one of the first things that you need to determine when you get legal counsel involved, right, is the first thing the lawyers ask are, how are your backups, right? Why are the lawyers asking that question? Well, the lawyers are asking that question because they've learned that that's when they're involved. If your backups aren't good, then the lawyers are involved because that's who negotiates with the attackers, right? So the first question isn't how did they get in, what did they get, what did they steal? The first question is how quickly can you get back online, because that immediately drives all the rest of the economic decisions that are coming next. When you can inform lawyers in that first conversation that you have backups that you can recover from, and you have times, and you have a cost associated with what it's going to take to get back online, then you provide your supporting counsel, right, a lot more information and a lot more chips to potentially negotiate with, and potentially eliminate the risk of data being stolen or released, et cetera. Mike, you talked earlier about being asked by customers if we recommend organizations bank crypto, right, or hold on to cryptocurrency in the event that they would need to pay a ransom or a ransomer. And I bring that up in that I just mentioned legal counsel and the lawyers. We don't recommend anything like that. That's something that you should keep between you and your counsel, your legal counsel, and keep protected by attorney-client privilege when it comes to how you interact with attackers and in a ransomware event. I bring that up to highlight that because, like I said, this first question a lawyer is going to ask somebody like us that's involved in incident response is how quickly can you get back online? What are the other impacts on the environment? What's the actual IT/business impact, right, of the event? And that is then what they use to gauge on how much they need to keep in contact or not in contact with whoever has the encryption key on the other side. But those things, right, interestingly enough, those conversations a lot of the times are also handled and managed through insurance providers and with counsel, involved the insurance providers. So, Mike, like you were saying, they see all the inside. The insurance providers really, have a feeling for what's occurring and how how to recover from these events. And I segue into that saying, we would say that same thing. Again, depend on your providers or your legal counsel for making decisions on how you're going to interact or move forward with attackers. That's not something that organizations should really do on their own. It's a interesting conversation that can be filled with pitfalls, and a lot of times, what I understand with companies, they can really reduce as well, like the cost if they do end up having to pay.
So I think an unmentioned value add of cyber insurance. We continue to talk about how coverage is dropping and premiums are going up, and it might foster the question of, well, why do I even have cyber insurance, right? Well, my coverage may not be that high, but they maintain relationships with third-party organizations that are going to be the best benefit for my organization to work with in the event of a breach or a situation that I need to find someone to work with that knows what they're doing. To find that on your own, either before an attack happens or, after an attack happens, that's a challenging thing to do. And, who better than your provider that is dealing with this on a daily basis to employ who they feel is best of breed or works best for their organization as an insurance provider to handle these situations. So, that's one of the unmentioned values of a cyber insurance policy is those third-party relationships and connections to handle a situation, whether it be paying out a ransomware or recoverability of data or any other number of services that can be provided in an incident scenario to handle all of the needs your organization is going to have in an incident.
So, with that said, I think, to wrap up this topic, right, looking back at 2021, what we're saying is, if you haven't already, pull your insurance policy, your cyber insurance policy out, your current policy, give it a read, contact your agent, your underwriters, however you go to the market for insurance, and start that process now if you haven't already. And then, feel free to reach out to myself, Keith, or Mike if you'd like some advice or just any more input or information about going about that process. All right, so we talked about cyber insurance, right? How that's really the apple cart's kind of flipped on that as after coming out of 2021. What else? I mean, we talked about micro-segmentation a lot, right? And that's coming up. I think that's coming up for one reason is that it's actually making its way into cyber insurance questionnaires. The other reason I think is, do a little plug here. I did a webinar on this a couple months ago in the Arraya Tech Summit. But the other reason I think it's coming, it's a hot topic, is that it's actually possible with the tool sets that are available and without having to have a significant networking team operating your network at all times. You can now operate a micro-segmented environment where needed, as needed, with tool sets that fit the job, right? It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. Get out your subnet calculator and drop all your border firewalls in place.
So question for you, when you say micro-segmentation, what does that really mean? Like, what's the broadest definition you could put on that so that when I hear that phrase, I really kind of zero in and not think of it as being super granular on segmenting my environment?
Right. So what we mean by that is segmenting the network traffic at the host level, potentially at the host level, all the way down rather to the host level, or even the service level, right, running on the host, the listener service level. So and putting policies in place, network micro-segmentation policies in place against that host that dictate every egress, ingress network traffic event that occurs on that host. So the concept there is you could, by using micro-segmentation, you can have out of support hosts is a major use case, right? We have a lot of clients that have servers. They might be running Windows 2000. They might be running Solaris, 2.5. Systems that have known vulnerabilities that don't have active OEM support, but that have a key function inside of an organization, but they only need very small, limited communication, right, between a group of hosts. And so by using micro-segmentation, you can specify that communication between just those hosts, between just the entities inside of an organization. So you can have, you can dictate layer 4, layer 7, and basically layer 3 traffic in and out. Probably not a great explanation. I could have read it off the board, but
no. But I think it gives some color to the phrase of micro-segmentation because I feel like that can be interpreted rather broadly depending on where you sit in the IT org and what your perspective is.
Yeah. So I mean the simple example of it is when you are on a legitimate guest Wi-Fi connection somewhere and you can't see any of the other clients, right, that are on the same Wi-Fi network. They probably have they're on the same subnet, they're getting IPs in the same range. However, there's, the network's designed so there's no crosstalk, for instance. That's an example. Where it's possible now is the tool sets with using network visibility, we can see manage and set the policies on those individual hosts, right? And that's why before essentially we'd be talking about a firewall management for each individual host. But there's intelligence built into the layer 4, layer 7 awareness. So, for instance, if you want to allow SSH, but you don't want to allow SSH over standard port 22, you can set policies to allow for that. You can set policies to allow for only communication in certain time periods during the day. There's user-based micro-segmentation options now with the tool sets out there. So you could have this is very effective for vendor management, right? So an organization that has a VDI environment is a great candidate. You can set tool set where third-party vendor logs in to manage the HVAC system, right? We haven't heard this one before, and when they log in, that the policy that applies to that user only allows for that VDI to connect specifically to that single IP of the HVAC system and not the PCI Oracle backend database at the same time, right? So yeah, Cisco has a few tools out there that support it, depending on how you want to implement it. And also VMware with their NSX product is really the market leader in the microseg space. But if you're talking about hybrid cloud, you're talking about multi-cloud, and you're in digital transformation conversations, microseg is part of those conversations, right? If you're talking about zero trust, micro-segmentation is a foundational element of zero trust. So there's like I said, that's a big topic. I think that we're going to see going into 2022 coming up more and more, and there's more motivation to do it. It's still not going to be easy, and we talked about this in the webinar. Don't boil the ocean, take it slow, address problem areas first. There isn't value in tackling and trying to resegment, redo your whole network or your whole data center. It's really should be targeted, and you're going to get a lot of value when you go after your mission critical applications.
But the ultimate goal, just to go back to Keith's question, the ultimate goal is to increase or help you contain threats, right, and limit the attack surface from a user, application, and system level. You're the zero trust idea of boiling it down to not just systems anymore. We're also thinking about users and applications, and we can be smart with that from a single platform, single pane of glass. I almost said it.
Moving forward,
yeah. We can play buzzword bingo, but you get that centralized area to allow the same systems to access each other in different ways based on context, and you get to define the controls around that, and they're dynamic, right? So instead of a one master firewall policy.
So from a governance perspective, I mean, when I hear this conversation and microsegmentation and some of the requirements that I feel are important to have a successful deployment of microsegmentation is asset management, right? You have to know what's on the environment, but it's not just from a physical node perspective now, it's services and users, APIs, connections in and out, your ingress, egress, not just from the internet to your trusted networks, but between trusted networks at this point, right? Because of our multi-cloud and multi-tenant and, all of these things that are incorporated into an environment these days, you really need to understand what they are. And when we don't, how do we discover them, right? So micro-segmentation, well, this can only communicate with this other service. Now some shadow IT or some service you were unaware of can't communicate because you've now successfully blocked that communication. Now these users have to raise their hand and raise the flag. Hey, my service is not working anymore. What'd you do? Oh, what is this? We had no idea this even existed, right? So it's a larger spotlight on the assets in our environment, and assets is a very broad phrase these days. It really helps support this compliance structure of your Center for Internet Security Top 20 or NIST 853 if you want to go that far with it. But all of these fundamental compliance frameworks that talk about asset management as 1, 2, and 3, we're really highlighting that at this point with the zero trust talk or this micro-segmentation talk, and I think that's wonderful.
Right.
Yeah, and Mike, you hit the nail. You said it right. Reducing the attack surface, right? So I mean, anything in zero trust, that's pretty much, those are all the foundational elements, right? It's initially reducing the attack surface and creating your the areas where you of connectivity and authentication and re-authentication, what's the word I'm looking for there? Not retrusting, but revalidation, right?
Yeah.
Continuous validation. That's why micro-segmentation is a foundational element, right? To zero trust, in that you only want authentication to be supported, connectivity to be supported over the ports that are specifically trusted to connect over, and make sure that there aren't any other openings for vulnerabilities or listening services on other ports, or negotiated ports, etc. The other element to that too with micro-segmentation, and we talked about this a little in the webinar as well, is the power of being able to temporarily affect the traffic that can hit your hosts if they're known to be vulnerable. So in the example of Log4j, right? If you had micro-segmentation deployed, you could have the ability to specifically just block the connectivity on the vulnerable ports or the listening ports. You might not have to take the whole system offline. You might disrupt the application. I'm not suggesting you can do it without disrupting the application. But what I'm suggesting is, as a security in your security program, you have the option to disrupt communication across application protocols, right, that are known vulnerable at that time until a patch or a fix comes out. Pretty powerful.
The cool thing to me is the ability to have a system both be trusted and untrusted at the same time. When you take those user roles that you were talking about before, to where we could say nobody is allowed to access system A on anything except for users in this group, and we don't have to move users from in those groups to get a new DHCP lease in another range and create a whole new firewall policy for them. We're using their user roles to define what apps they can target downstream, instead of having to configure all of our infrastructure around all of our different roles and create firewall zone policies for each of those roles. It makes it so much more consolidated. Having spent years doing it the old way, that sounds so cool to me, and I wish I had it 10 years ago.
If I could go, I mean, it's broadening the use of risk acceptance at a more granular level.
Yeah.
When Scott, you brought up Log4j, and if you follow any of the growth of that, the sophistication of the Log4j attacks is growing exponentially by the day as attackers dig in and try to figure out the best way to exploit and hide those exploits through obfuscation and other techniques. There might be critical systems in our environment that have a Log4j vulnerability, but the attack vector is not part of the normal consumption of those services. We now have the ability to accept the risk that a system has Log4j vulnerabilities, but not impact the availability of the services that are being provided, because we're protecting those limited areas that aren't part of that normal consumption stream. So that risk acceptance granularity is really supportive of a production environment.
Yeah, an extension of this, so that's the protection element, right? And we just saw an extension of the analysis side released with network threat analytics, at least on the IBM platform. So the same things that we do with machine learning, of learning what user behavior is going on, what their regular peer group is, so who users they're associated with. We're seeing the functionality on the network to say, these are the systems, this is their normal behavior, this is their normal peer group. These servers usually only talk to these other two servers. So now if somebody starts connecting from a server that's not in their peer group, we can be notified. But when you mix those two together, you can get something really powerful. Yeah.
I mean, so you're talking about using, the machine learning elements for attack detection, right?
Right.
As the main tool, as a tool to identify attacks out of the network visibility traffic, right? That's what we're talking
Right.
about. Versus, when we talk about like network segmentation or micro-segmentation planning, and we're actually would be doing the same thing, right? We'd be taking net flow traffic, network visibility traffic of some sort, analyzing that, breaking asset groups out of it from application, endpoint, network subnets, et cetera, and deciding, from a business case perspective, right, what should be allowed to talk to who, what we would expect to be able to talk to what, and then potentially making some, border decisions in that segmentation conversation. It is interesting to think about the counter to that, right? Well, it's sort of the where SIM and QRadar got their start, which was, hey, just throw everything. Don't worry about all that complicated overhead administration and all that, right? Just beef up your visibility products, throw as much data to it as you can get, and then depend on Sherlock's helper to comb through it in real time to see if anything bad's going on. And I think we've actually came to an area, right, where they're converging, where I think, there's so much noise, so much data. That's not possible anymore. That's literally not possible ananymore. You still have to have a map that you can break out for your system to see some intelligence out of it. But the anomaly detection inside the network traffic is huge. And I think, that's really where that's the next main element, right, of the EDR managed detection and response front is
right.
To map all that traffic.
And I think that goes to the previous point. So, we roll out microseg and we put the network traffic with the network threat analytics or whatever platform that uses machine learning to spot these patterns. The two complement each other at that point. But this goes to an earlier point before we started recording of sometimes we have these conversations where somebody demands, I want a one product. Where's my one product? How come your solution doesn't fulfill everything? I need box product X to fix everything. And that's just, not how it works. We need to layer these things on top.
Haven't we always said that? Isn't that a perpetual request?
Yeah. It depends on who you talk to and what the promises are, right?
Yeah, and it also should only have one button, and they should push it at the back before they ship it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that is that definitely is the challenge, right? And what's interesting too is that now with the move to cloud and the adoption of more than one cloud service type, right? When I mean that, when I say that, I mean that there's SaaS, PaaS, IaaS as cloud options now, and then also there's just things that are people using that they don't think are cloud that are really cloud, right? And so about 5 years ago, this network visibility, if people had the appetite for microseg, this network visibility conversation would have been a lot less complex. It would have been less expensive, right? And it would have actually been more productive, potentially, and more value in having it 5 years ago. But now, today, Mike, the user or the client you just described, they're going to be even less happy, right? Because we're going to go, well, I can't see your Microsoft 365 traffic the same way that I could see your Amazon traffic, which, by the way, I can't see that the same way that I can see your Azure traffic, and I can't see that the same way that I can see your on-prem VMware and Red Hat traffic, right? And running on your Juniper Cisco network, right? All different. What was it, about 2 years ago, I think, the cloud providers gave network tap options. AWS, you might have thought they found gold on the moon, the way they announced that at their conference. Somehow the idea of providing network visibility into their backend was magic. That quickly followed up by, Azure provides that, Google provides that at some point now too. How do we have, so there is no, if you're in the cloud, right, unless you're completely in the cloud, then there is no one-stop shop, right, for any of these cybersecurity solutions. I'll caveat that and say, if you just opened up, hung your shingle in the last couple of years, or did some ridiculous transformation migration and refactored everything in your org and you're operating in the cloud, there's a story for you out there, right, Mike? I mean, there's a one button at the factory story for that. But definitely not when you actually have employees with laptops that use email and print things, with clients that have, that you transact money with. There's typically not one stop for that. What's interesting though is that it's converging now. We talked about backups, right? Being on an MFA, being two major elements coming out of these 2021 breaches. Authentication and backups and restores were not cybersecurity, traditional cybersecurity tools, right? We've consulted and been involved in recoveries and business continuity and all those things for years as being part of the business risk conversation. Now we are interacting, what I'm finding to be, with our data center peers more than we ever have before, which I think is a good thing. And I guess I'm putting that back on to you guys, thinking like, this, at least at Arraya, I know that the cross-team collaboration has increased significantly as a result of impacts on our customers from cyber events that they've had over the last year and a half or so. Because recovery is huge, obviously, right? If you're recovering, you need infrastructure, you need data center, you need if you're backing up and you want to keep your backups past a certain point, and you want to add immutable capabilities, you need more storage. You need if you want to hit your RTO times, you need to actually have them mapped out. And you have
let me ask this question, Scott. Where does security fall in the system development lifecycle? Classically,
sure, right.
By design in the beginning, right? But where does it end up being introduced in the practical implementation of it, right? It's always on the back end. So we're seeing this kind of full circle, like, there's this increased awareness or need to have cybersecurity because of, business risk, cyber insurance premiums, all of these. We need security earlier in that development cycle, right? So we're kind of seeing now the collaboration is requested and required earlier in the cycle, which is all a really good thing. But our challenges continue to increase with the technologies and the interoperability and interconnections of these technologies.
Well, and to that point, right? I mean, I've seen the CIO, the IT leader in general, has raised the priorities of the cybersecurity program in their organizations, whether it's a conscious direct thing that they made choices around.
It's not the CIO, it's the CEO, it's your board members, it's your chairman. It's going so much further up that executive stack at this point.
But what's interesting is I've noticed that, right, instead of the conversation saying, why are you spending this much? Why do you need that much? It's, are we spending enough? Right.
Yes.
And using the previous spend, future spend trends to try to gauge that. And that now, what's interesting is growing, right? It's opening up to DR, backup and recovery, things that organizations probably should have been doing as just best practice for real DR plans. Now they're actually being held accountable. They have to show, right, a report that proves that their critical systems can get back online. They never had to do that before, right? That changes everything.
Right, and it doesn't always end up in increased spend either. I mean, I'm working with a client where they've shifted to a different technology where there's more value add, where it's a wash on what their annual spend is. And honestly, because of some of those shifts in technology, they're ending up saving some money in other areas that was an unintended consequence of this shift in technology. So it's creatively looking at solutions and figuring out what might be the best fit that covers a broader spectrum of technologies and security.
Yeah, it's just interesting you're saying that, because I think that the backups, again, right, how this has changed. you know, I'm an ops guy, right? I work data center, and when I was responsible for choosing and implementing and supporting a backup system, an enterprise backup system, the things that mattered to me were incremental support for reduced backup windows, because I needed my backups to get completed between it was like 10 p.m. right, and 5:30 a.m. And if they ran past 6 a.m., it was a bad day for everybody, right?
Yep.
So when we were evaluating and sourcing and implementing a solution, the capability to do incrementals and fit everything into that window, that was our goal. So as we size the server, as we size the storage, hit those windows. What we never discussed, right, in those exact same conversations was, to my point earlier, was recovery times, right? And so, early in my career, I was pretty green in this space. I learned the hard way that the flip side of a nightly incremental backup is recovering it is an exponential number that you can't even do the math on. It's like, to some degree of pi, right? That you have to multiply. If it's a 1 terabyte drive, but it's had 25, it's got 30 days of incrementals, it has to restore the first one it ever took, which could literally be from 8 years ago, which could literally be on a tape somewhere buried, right? If you don't have your backup set up right. Then once that's laid down, then it's restore from every single night of the incremental before. Anyway, I digress, right? So obviously today, when you're trying to bring your if you had an encrypted drive, trying to bring it back online, let's just not even say your whole environment. Let's just say you have one drive that got encrypted that had some significantly valuable information on it. That could take a week to get that back online with the old backups. The things that the old backup systems held valuable, I'll put it that way, right? And so today, when we're talking about backups, right? I mean, and it really shifted overnight. I mean, it really went from, how do I have shorter backup windows? How do I not spend an arm and a leg on backups? Why am I spending so much on tape? Where do I ship them to? What's my rotation, right? It shifted from that to, how do I get everything back online as quickly as I can? Not only that, give me multiple options, right, to get things back online. I want to be able to recover my VM images immediately, with temporary storage. I want to be able to, access, let's say have mail flowing before my mail system's back online, but not necessarily need my mail data, right? That was a big shift, and organizational change. So, I'm sort of rambling now, right? But I think it kind of sparked my mind when you were talking about that, just really the shift in how we're evaluating backup products now, and how it's really changed completely because of the cyber risk scenarios.
Yeah, it was really just a support function, and now it's more than a support function. It's a business ops, it's security, it's recoverability. It's put its finger in all of those areas of the business where it was truly, you hated to be the guy doing backup, swapping tapes out, because that was a very, very thankless job.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say another piece there is, you talked about the tape, right? And I don't know how much that's being used by our client base anymore, but I think one of the things that is still being used is a backup server, backup storage, and the storage media there. So even if you are testing your restore, you may be testing one server at a time, and in a real world scenario, you might have 10 servers that need to be restored. Are you pulling them all from the same disk? Because you might get good read speeds on one server, but does the underlying storage media allow you to restore in a timely manner multiple systems? Or the network link between those systems, is that going? Where's the bottleneck? So the same thing is still happening. You have to test these things to find where that bottleneck is. You had to find out that the backup tape and the iterative process was what gave you the struggle. But now I think people need to find where their bottleneck is and what is acceptable for them. Just because a single system hits your maximum allowable downtime or your RTO, does 5 systems, 10 systems really test it and not just a one-off, because you're not getting yourself any further from protecting yourself in a real world.
So just to layer on top of that real quick, what's the business priority per system for Restore when you have multiples competing for those resources, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that highlights a couple of things, right? We're talking about recovery, of data, right, and systems. What we stop short of highlighting is, and I feel silly because this is something I like to beat the drum about, configurations, right? I mean, Mike brought it up, right? So backups of your backup server, backups of the passwords that you need to log in to your backup server with. Here's another good one. What are your keys? If you are a responsible organization, your systems are using encryption keys to encrypt the data. Where is that?
Enterprise key management.
Where are they? There's reasonable. Could be a reasonable scenario, right, where you have to move the disk into other cabinets or move it to a different location for recovery, and you need to be able to obviously decrypt the data that you're trying to recover. And a couple of things I can say. The silver lining here is, number one, obviously the providers are on top of this, right? So there are lots of options out there, no matter who you're using as backup software, backup tooling. There's a lot of great integrations out there with quick recovery capabilities, temporary cloud-based recovery. They don't come cheap, but they are typically like break glass solutions, right? Where you sign a contract with a basic SLA that has a cost that is only then that only blows up, right? If you actually need the resources to recover those systems. So there are a lot of options out there now that there weren't before. That if you do have those 5 critical systems, Keith, to your point, that are competing for business priority, right? Okay, buy a contract around those with Zerto and Cohesity to get them recovered and back online, within a 15-hour SLA or whatever it might be. I think they even have them shorter. The other thing I was going to say too is, the other change that's happened in organizations with backups is one of the ways that the backup system I was describing earlier was used. Not one of the ways, the main way it was used was when an employee, one of the 5,000 users supported in that environment, would delete a Word file by accident. A lot of times they just moved it to another folder by accident, but they thought they deleted it. But anybody have, back on the help desk days, it's like, I don't know what happened to that folder. It was just here. And like, you go look at the date modified and they drug it into the wrong folder by mistake.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, so that was the main way, right? Help desks would call, put a ticket in, the backup operator would put the ticket in queue to get Mike's, report file that he mistakenly deleted the day before, restored back to his personal drive, and then maybe also to his manager's personal drive, at the same time. Or maybe HR calls the backup operator and asks for a full PST restore of an employee that was recently let go from backup, right, to their drive so they can read that if they want to. Those elements have gone away, or even from the e-discovery part, right? I mean, we're not using backups. Hopefully, your organization is not using backup software to maintain file version control, to maintain e-discovery and archiving responsibilities for email, things like that, right? And I bring those things up again because these are criteria that people were choosing these solutions for in the past. So we've taken, and the other thing that we're not that's changed too is for Active Directory backups and recovery, right? That's another thing that anybody that's worked in ops since Windows 2000 came out, so whenever, right, can tell you that there's 0 good stories for backup recovery and resiliency for Active Directory servers. You're crossing your fingers that you have one good one online somewhere. And if you don't, you'll point flip and pick the one that you're going to go with to be your good one, right? There's a lot of great Active Directory backup and recovery tools available today as well. which again was not something that was, I don't think, was really possible in the organizations up until about maybe 2-3 years ago. With some of the tools that are out there to really just recover an entire AD database with integrity. And that's shifting as well. So just wanted to make those points because that Active Directory, right, is huge, right? And again, I consider that to be in the configuration list, right? When I say back up your configs, network configs, AD, huge.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that does, in the recovery scenario, the old model is basically restore all the servers, right? But with configuration management, if you are using configuration management platform to configure your systems, you may be able to just create new ones and not have to do any restoration, depending upon what they're doing, or you're significantly reducing what would have to be restored by just recreating from a known good place that's saved in your config. And the config management platforms, that's a very small footprint when you're defining what your system does with an Ansible or whatever comparative that you have out there. You might have a Git repository that defines all of your servers, and that makes the recovery scenario so much easier than all hands on deck. We need to restore 20 servers right now.
Do you remember what was on that one? Do you remember what was on
yeah.
that one? All right, we used the same IPs.
Yeah. Who made mail server 03?
Yeah. Do we need a NAT for that one?
Right.
It's those are not fun days.
Right.
So I think another important tool that we could highlight here for those that are looking to implement solutions, or Scott, you had made a point. Some of these can be, excuse me, really costly to implement depending on the amount of data that you're looking to back up for protection, right? So I think that's an important point to highlight, is the ability to provide a metric to the business, to finance, to the CFO. What does it cost per megabyte? What does it cost per gigabyte? What does it cost per terabyte of data to support a backup and recovery solution? That really informs your process for prioritizing what are your most critical systems. Does that then inform it's worth the spend to put a better configuration management system in place so that we're not backing up that data. We're just rebuilding from scratch because we know we have solid configuration data to build from. Right. That cost metric better supports our position from an IT support perspective and a cyber support perspective on getting the funding we need better allocated to the areas that have the largest impact.
Yeah, and one other piece there is configuration management, right? That may actually shore up some other, it's not necessarily a security ask or responsibility, but it may shore up other security concerns because you're standardizing how your systems are configured. When you have 100 servers out there that were all created and maintained by a staff of 12 different people, and who knows what user or how they're doing it, you might just say, we need whatever IIS configured and turned on with these web apps, and you have 10 web servers. They might be done 10 different ways. So when things hit the fan and you need to secure them,
if you're not using configuration management, they are done.
They are, yeah.
Right. Even if
right. The only way to standardize that and make things at least somewhat predictable. I mean, this is the goal here, right? We have to have some sort of standards and predictability so that we can figure out what we do when things go wrong. And the only way to really consolidate that is through a configuration management platform.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I know we've talking for some time. Thanks everyone for joining the Vodcast. We will be back soon with more interesting topics and fun-filled conversation. If you have any suggestions or you would like us to cover something specific, please contact us. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I think it was good.
Please like and subscribe, comment down below.
Yeah.